The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the desert sky in streaks of burning orange and crimson. The wind whispered through the dry brush and the skeletal remains of ancient trees, carrying the faint scent of sage and dust. The Apache woman moved cautiously, her moccasins silent on the cracked earth, eyes scanning the horizon for movement. She had been wandering alone for hours, searching for herbs and roots that could heal her village's sick, but something in the air felt different. Uneasy dot as she approached a narrow ravine, half hidden behind jagged rocks, her eyes caught a strange sight. A figure lay sprawled across the sand, motionless. At first, she thought it was a trick of the sunlight or perhaps an animal, but as she drew closer, the contours of a man's body became clear. He was young, his dark hair tangled and streaked with dust, his clothing torn as if he had been dragged through the brush. A shiver ran down her spine, not from the cold, though the desert night would soon bring a biting chill, but from something far more primal. Her heart pounded in her chest as she crouched beside him. There was a stillness about him that made the hairs on her arms stand on end, an almost unnatural quiet that seemed to absorb the sounds of the desert around them. Tentatively, she reached out, her fingers brushing the coarse fabric of his shirt. The moment her skin made contact, a sharp gasp escaped her lips. It was not simply the touch of another human that startled her. A torrent of sensations crashed through her mind, memories that were not her own. Whispers of ancient battles, echoes of laughter and screams, visions of people she had never met, places she had never seen. Her knees buckled beneath her, and for a moment she could not distinguish between reality and the chaotic storm in her mind. Her chest tightened, breath coming in ragged bursts. The desert seemed to tilt and sway around her, and the wind now carried voices, old voices, ancestors calling, warning, beckoning. She staggered back, her hands shaking, eyes wide as the vision subsided into a dizzying haze. But even as the immediate shock faded, a profound realization settled over her. This man was no ordinary stranger. There was something ancient in his presence, something that reached across generations, stirring in her blood a connection she could not name. Her mind raced with questions, fear, and a strange, desperate curiosity. Who was he? Why was he here? And most pressing of all, what had just happened when she touched him? The man stirred slightly, and she froze. His eyelids fluttered, and a groan escaped his lips. Her instinct was to flee, to escape the confusion and madness that had momentarily overtaken her. But something rooted her in place. Something deep inside, an invisible thread of fate, told her that she could not leave him here. Whatever danger or mystery this man carried, it was now entwined with her own destiny. As the sun sank lower, casting long shadows over the jagged rocks, she knelt beside him once more. This time, her touch was deliberate, cautious, but still trembling. She felt a flicker, a pulse, a recognition that went beyond fear. Her gasp this time was quieter, filled with awe instead of shock. The desert seemed to hold its breath along with her, the horizon glowing like a promise or a warning. She did not yet understand what had just passed between them, only that her life had shifted in a single heartbeat. The man's eyes slowly opened, dark and piercing, and for the first time they met hers. And in that instant, the world she knew, the familiar desert, the safety of her tribe seemed impossibly distant. Something ancient had awakened, and she knew, with an unshakable certainty, that nothing would ever be the same again. The desert grew colder as the sun disappeared behind the jagged horizon. Shadows stretched long and dark across the sand, curling around rocks and the skeletal remains of desert shrubs. The Apache woman remained kneeling beside the man, her hands still hovering near his chest, though now she did not dare touch him again. The initial shock of the first encounter had passed, but in its place came a storm far more insidious, a storm she could feel churning inside her very bones. The moment her fingertips had brushed his skin, something had shifted within her. Memories that were not hers flickered behind her eyelids. Disjointed but vivid, the clash of warriors' tomahawks, the rhythmic beating of drums in a long-forgotten ceremony, voices whispering secrets in a language she had never learned. Faces she did not recognize her ancestors perhaps stared at her with eyes full of urgency and warning. Each vision hit her with a weight so tangible that she staggered. Gripping the nearest rock to steady herself, the man stirred slightly, groaning. But it was as if he did not belong in the same plane of existence she now inhabited. She watched him carefully, the line of his jaw, the shadow under his cheekbones, and every detail seemed amplified, sharpened. But it was not his physical form that held her captive. It was the invisible aura surrounding him. The current of energy that seemed to pulse from him in waves she could see and feel as clearly as the desert wind on her skin. Her breath came in quick, uneven bursts. Every time she tried to form a coherent thought, the vision surged back more vivid than before. She saw herself in unfamiliar clothing, standing among strangers in a ceremonial circle, their faces painted in white and red. She felt the heat of a fire on her skin, smelled the coppery tang of blood, and heard a chorus of voices chanting in unison, each syllable vibrating in her chest as if it had been carved directly into her soul. The world around her, the desert, the distant mountains, the dying light of the horizon began to feel unreal. Sand under her hands seemed to shift and writhe. Rocks appeared to move in the corner of her vision. Even the man's slow, labored breathing sounded strange, echoing unnaturally, as though the air around him had become a conduit for some hidden energy she could not name. Panic clawed at her chest, sharp and insistent. She wanted to pull away, to flee to the safety of her tribe, to escape the chaos that now ruled her senses. But even as fear surged, it was mixed with an irresistible pull toward him. Her body, her mind, seemed tethered to his presence by a thread that could neither be broken nor ignored. She realized with a mixture of terror and awe that her life was no longer entirely her own. Her hands trembled, and she pressed them to her temples, trying to ground herself. The visions became fragments of prophecy, images of battle she had yet to fight, decisions she had yet to make, and sacrifices she could not yet comprehend. She understood in a single devastating instant that touching him had awakened something ancient, something that had been dormant in her bloodline for generations. And now it was hungry, demanding her attention, her obedience, her very sanity. The man's eyes opened fully then, dark, intelligent, and unnervingly calm. He looked at her as if he knew every thought, every fear, every hidden memory that had been thrown to the surface. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the words lodged in her throat. She could not articulate what she was feeling because even she did not fully understand it. The desert whispered around her, carrying secrets she was only beginning to grasp. The wind sounded like voices, the rocks like drums, and the sand beneath her like the heartbeat of the earth itself. And through it all, one undeniable truth pressed itself into her mind. Nothing would ever be the same again. She was no longer simply an observer in her world. She was bound to this man and to the powers he carried with a connection that could neither be explained nor undone. And in that moment, fear, awe, and a dark, intoxicating curiosity surged together, pulling her ever closer to the edge of madness. The desert night had fully claimed the sky, leaving only a scattering of stars as witnesses to the strange unfolding drama. The Apache woman sat cross-legged on the sand, her body tense, her mind a storm of unrelenting visions and emotions. The man she had found, this enigmatic stranger, was now fully awake, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that made her feel both exposed and protected at the same time. She wanted answers, desperately, but words faltered on her tongue. How could she explain what she had seen, felt, and touched in that fleeting, terrifying moment? He rose slowly, his movements deliberate and calm, as though he knew the effect he had on her. "You've seen too much," he said softly, his voice carrying over the quiet wind. There was no accusation in his tone, only the weight of truth. "And yet, you've seen only a fraction." She flinched at the certainty in his words. Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her effort to sound composed. "Why? Why did I see things? Memories that weren't mine?" The man knelt beside her again, close enough that the thread of energy she had felt earlier hummed stronger, but careful not to touch her. "I am what remains of a line that carries the old power of our people," he said. "A lineage tied not just to this world, but to the spiritual currents that bind life, death, and memory. What you felt when you touched me, that was the awakening of a connection that existed long before either of us were born." Her mind tried to grasp his words, but they only deepened the confusion. "A connection?" she whispered. "To you?" He nodded. "To me, yes, but also to the past. To our ancestors. Their battles, their choices, their regrets. They are all carried in the blood, and in some, the touch can awaken them." Her chest tightened. She remembered the visions, the fire, the chanting, the faces of warriors and elders who had never lived in her lifetime, yet seemed impossibly familiar. And she understood now, the visions were not random, nor a trick of the mind. They were fragments of a legacy she had never known, a truth that had been lying dormant in her for generations. "Why me?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Why did it choose me?" "It chose you because you are ready, or at least, as ready as anyone could be," he said, though his words were heavy with uncertainty. "But beware, seeing too much too soon can break the mind. The visions you've experienced are only the beginning. They are not just memories, they are a call, a test, a warning. You must learn to control them, or they will consume you." A shiver ran through her. She had already felt the first taste of that consuming power. The visions had left her trembling, disoriented, and on the verge of panic. And yet, she could not turn away. There was a pull, an invisible thread that tied her to him, to the ancient energies he carried, to something greater than herself. She looked into his eyes, searching for reassurance, for guidance, for a tether to reality. "And if I fail?" she asked, the words almost lost beneath the howl of the night wind. He hesitated, the faintest shadow crossing his face. "Then you may not return to who you were. But I will help you," he promised. "I will guide you through it, if you let me. You are not alone in this, though the path will test you beyond what you can imagine." The weight of his words settled over her like a mantle she could not remove. She realized that the world she had known, the quiet desert, the safety of her tribe, the life she had imagined for herself was gone. In its place was something vast, dangerous, and alive, calling her forward. Her fingers itched to touch him again, but she held back. Instead, she focused on the thread of energy that connected them, feeling it pulse with life, history, and power. Somewhere deep within her, fear mingled with fascination. She had glimpsed her own potential, a power she had never known existed, and now she had to decide whether to embrace it or let it destroy her. The man rose, and in the darkness, his silhouette seemed almost like a shadow of the past, an echo of ancestors she had never met. "We must move," he said. "There are those who will come looking for what has been awakened. And if they find you first—" His voice trailed, heavy with unspoken warning. She nodded, the fear and awe in her chest now tempered by determination. Whatever this connection was, she could not turn away. The desert was silent once more, but the air between them thrummed with a promise. Their fates were entwined, and the journey ahead would change them both forever. The night stretched on, a heavy, suffocating darkness pressing in from all sides. The desert had changed in her perception. The wind no longer carried mere whispers of sage and sand, but voices ancient, urgent, accusing. The Apache woman stumbled over rocks and dry brush as she followed the man, though her mind wavered between lucidity and chaos. The visions that had begun with a single touch now returned in relentless waves, unbidden and uncontrollable. She tried to speak to him, to ask for guidance, but her words tangled in her throat. Each time she opened her mouth, fragments of visions poured out instead, shrill cries of warriors, the roar of fire, images of people she did not know, doing deeds she had never witnessed, yet they felt achingly real. The man glanced back, his eyes dark and patient, but she saw a flicker of concern there, a recognition of the danger that lurked in the depths of her mind. Her knees buckled, and she sank to the sand, hands clutching her temples. The vision swirled faster now, merging with reality so completely that she could no longer distinguish one from the other. She saw herself surrounded by shadows, her tribe calling her name, while fire danced at the edges of the desert and the man stood silently, watching. The line between life and memory blurred, leaving her trapped in a nightmare of her own making. Her breathing became shallow, her heart hammering against her ribs as a sensation of vertigo overtook her. The wind seemed alive, circling her in spirals that whispered threats and prophecies in a tongue she felt she almost understood. She fell forward, her hands digging into the sand as if she could anchor herself to something solid, but even the earth beneath her seemed to tremble. Responsive to the chaos she carried inside, the man knelt beside her, but she recoiled instinctively. "Stay back," she cried, voice cracking. I can't. I don't know what's real." He hesitated, then spoke gently but firmly. "The visions are not here to destroy you. They are trying to show you something, but you must control them, or they will control you." She shook her head violently. "Control? I can't. Tears stung her eyes, blurring the harsh desert landscape into streaks of color and shadow. The voices grew louder, a cacophony of warnings, accusations, and longing that filled her ears until she felt as if her skull would split. She felt herself slipping into madness, into a place where fear and wonder collided violently, leaving her grasping at fragments of her sanity. For a moment, she imagined herself standing alone in the desert, screaming into the void, and the stars above seemed to answer with cold indifference. She saw the faces of her ancestors, their expressions a mixture of pity and frustration, and realized that they were not merely watching, they were judging her, testing her resolve. Every heartbeat, every breath, every twitch of her muscles felt magnified, as though she were suddenly aware of the smallest tremor in the universe. The man reached out again, slowly, his hand hovering just above hers. "Listen to me," he said. "Focus, breathe, anchor yourself in the present. You are stronger than this, stronger than the visions, stronger than the madness." She looked at him, seeing his face clearly for the first time since the touch. In his eyes, there was not just calm, but recognition, a mirror of the same power she carried, tempered by understanding. Slowly, hesitantly, she extended a trembling hand toward him. The pull of the vision still lingered. A storm at the edges of her mind, but his presence anchored her. If only for a fleeting moment, the desert remained quiet, save for the sigh of the wind and the distant cry of a coyote. Yet within her, the chaos had only begun. She understood now that the connection was not merely a blessing, it was a responsibility, a burden that could either elevate her beyond human limits or shatter her mind completely. As she rose unsteadily to her feet, gripping the man's arm for balance, a single thought pierced through the madness. She could not escape his fate. The visions were a part of her now, woven into her very essence. and if she survived them, she would emerge stronger or she would lose herself entirely. The desert stretched before them, dark, infinite, and unforgiving. And in the silent spaces between the shifting sands, the first seeds of her madness had taken root. The desert morning arrived like a whisper, pale light spilling over jagged rocks and wind-blown dunes. Yet the world seemed altered to her eyes. The sand was not merely grains of earth, but a shifting, living surface, echoing the turmoil in her mind. Her thoughts still tumbled uncontrollably, fragments of visions refusing to release their grip. But one thing was clear: she could not let him go. The man, mysterious, powerful, and unknowable, was both the source of her madness and the tether she could not sever. He had moved ahead during the night, navigating the rocky passes with ease, leaving only faint footprints in the sand. She followed, stumbling over stones and cacti, ignoring the rising sun burning her back. The desert seemed to stretch endlessly, a labyrinth designed to test her will. Every mirage, every flicker of shadow, now carried a dangerous ambiguity. She saw figures in the distance, tribal spirits, enemies, or hallucinations. And each step forward was a gamble with her mind. The wind carried whispers, low and urgent, threading through her thoughts. He is yours, he is not. Danger approaches. The past calls. The words were fragmented, but their meaning was unmistakable. The connection had awakened something ancient in her, something that pulled her relentlessly toward him. She could no longer distinguish between her desire to find him and the compulsion of the visions. At times, she imagined him just ahead, silhouetted against the sun, waiting for her. Other times, she saw him vanish into the sands, leaving her to chase only phantoms. Her pulse quickened with every sighting, her hands trembling as if they could grasp the intangible. The desert itself seemed to conspire with her confusion. Heat waves bent the air, transforming distant rocks into shapes she recognized from her visions: warriors, ancestors, and strangers who carried messages she could not decipher. Despite the chaos, she pressed on. Fear and obsession merged into a single driving force. Each step was both punishment and salvation. She remembered the man's words, "You are stronger than this." Yet the truth of her own fragility screamed louder. She had glimpsed power beyond her understanding, but the cost was nearly unbearable. Her mind teetered on the edge, pulled in every direction at once. Hours passed, though time felt unreal. Shadows lengthened and shifted, and she felt the desert grow darker in ways that had nothing to do with the setting sun. She thought she heard voices carried by the wind, warnings, promises, threats, each one striking chords deep within her soul. At times, she stopped, pressed her palms to her ears, and tried to drown out the endless noise. A beacon she could neither ignore nor resist. When she finally glimpsed him again, far ahead on a ridge, relief and panic collided. He was moving slowly, aware of her presence, but not turning. Her chest heaved as she pushed herself harder, feeling her muscles burn, sand scouring her skin. Every step brought her closer to him, yet the visions grew stronger, more insistent, threatening to overwhelm her completely. At last, she reached the ridge, collapsing in exhaustion. He looked back then, and for the first time, there was more than recognition in his eyes. There was understanding, tempered with concern. "You shouldn't have followed me like this," he said, his voice calm but firm, carrying over the wind. "The desert is not just sand and rocks. It will test you. And your mind may break before you reach me." Her chest heaved, eyes wild, hair matted with sweat. "I can't stop," she whispered. "I can't. I need to understand. I need to know why this is happening." He studied her silently for a long moment. Finally, he extended his hand, and she saw not just the promise of safety but a challenge. the next step in a journey neither of them fully understood. She reached for him, the desert wind tearing at her hair and clothes, and in that instant, the vision surged again, images of fire, battle, ancestors, and shadowy threats, but this time she felt a flicker of control. A fragile tether to reality threw him as they stood together on the ridge. The desert stretched endlessly around them, both beautiful and cruel. She realized, with a mixture of fear and awe, that the pursuit was not merely about finding him. It was about confronting the chaos within herself and learning whether she would master it or be consumed entirely. The ridge overlooked a narrow canyon, its jagged walls casting long shadows under the rising sun. The Apache woman stood rigid, chest heaving, as the man turned fully to face her. The desert wind whipped at their clothing, carrying sand and the faint scent of sage, but neither seemed to notice. Between them hung a tension thicker than the canyon's shadow, a collision of chaos and control. Madness and reason. "You shouldn't have followed me," he said again, though this time there was a sharp edge to his tone. His eyes, dark and unwavering, searched hers as if trying to read every thought, every vision that had overtaken her mind. "I warned you. The desert is not kind to the unprepared." She shook her head violently, brushing her tangled hair from her face. "You don't understand," she shouted. "It's not just the desert. It's you. You did something to me." Her voice cracked, trembling with fear, confusion, and frustration. "When I touched you, I saw things. I felt things. I can't control it." He stepped closer slowly, hands raised in a gesture of calm. "I did nothing to you," he said softly, though each word carried weight. "You awakened what was always inside you. The visions, the connection, they came from you, not me. I am merely the mirror showing you what is already there." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, a flicker of comprehension passed through the storm of her mind. "A mirror," she whispered. "But it hurts. It's too much." She stumbled backward, nearly losing her balance on the ridge, and the desert seemed to tilt beneath her. Sand slipped between her fingers as though the earth itself were conspiring to swallow her whole. He reached out again, more deliberately, and she flinched. "I can't touch you," he said quietly. "Not yet. You are too unstable. The connection is dangerous when uncontrolled. If I touch you now, it could overwhelm you completely." Her frustration boiled over. "Then what am I supposed to do? Sit here and go mad?" Her voice rose, almost a scream, carrying across the canyon. She swayed, caught between the terror of her own visions and the desperate need to understand him, to understand herself. "I need answers. I need." She froze mid-word because the vision surged stronger than ever, flooding her mind in a torrent of fire, blood, and shadow. Faces appeared, screaming and pleading, some familiar, some utterly alien. The desert itself seemed to convulse, the wind forming shapes that flickered like spirits on the edge of perception. She cried out, clutching her head, her knees buckling under the weight of the chaos. He stepped closer again, keeping his distance, and spoke in a calm, steady voice that cut through the storm. "Focus on me. Listen to my voice. Anchor yourself. You are stronger than these visions. You can endure them, but only if you face them, not fight them blindly." Her breath came in ragged gasps as she fought to obey, closing her eyes and focusing on the rhythm of his words. Slowly, a fragile clarity returned. The visions dimmed, not gone, but softened into flickering shadows at the edges of her mind. She opened her eyes, still trembling, and looked at him. His calm gaze held her attention, grounding her in a reality she had almost forgotten. For the first time, she realized that their conflict was not just physical. It was a battle of mind and spirit. Her uncontrolled, raw energy clashing against his disciplined, tempered presence. And in that clash, she felt an unexpected bond of recognition that he could guide her, but she must be willing to follow. I don't understand all of this," she whispered, voice shaky. "But I can't let it destroy me." He nodded, a faint shadow of a smile crossing his features. "Then you are ready for the next step. But it will not be easy. The visions, the power, they will test you every step of the way. And you must learn that the connection between us is both a weapon and a shield." The desert stretched silently around them, vast and unforgiving, but within the tension of their confrontation, the first threads of trust began to form. She realized that madness and clarity could coexist if only she learned to master the storm within herself. And though fear still lurked at the edges of her mind, a spark of determination flared. She would not be consumed. The man extended his hand one final time, a silent invitation. She reached for it, trembling, aware that the next step would change her irreversibly. Together they would face whatever the desert and their shared connection had in store. The desert had grown quieter, as if the land itself were holding its breath. After hours of walking in tense silence, the Apache woman finally found herself able to think without the visions completely overpowering her. The man had guided her to a sheltered canyon, where a small spring bubbled faintly among the rocks, its waters glimmering like liquid silver in the dim morning light. Here, he told her, she would begin to understand the nature of what had awakened inside her. He crouched by the spring, staring at his reflection in the water. "What you experienced when you first touched me," he began, his voice calm, deliberate, "was not an accident. Our ancestors performed rituals that bound certain bloodlines together, intertwining their spirits across generations. You are connected to me because of this lineage." Her eyes widened, and she crouched beside him, leaning closer to hear. "Bloodlines, rituals. I don't understand. What does this mean?" He sighed, dipping his hands into the spring and letting the water run through his fingers. "It means that the visions you saw were fragments of memory, echoes of events that shaped our people long before we were born. Battles, ceremonies, the choices of those who came before, they are carried in the blood. In some like you, the connection is strong enough to awaken unexpectedly. In others, it remains dormant." The woman stared into the water, seeing her own reflection ripple and distort. She remembered the chaos of her mind, the fire, the voices, the faces of ancestors she had never met. It all made sense now, yet only partially, and the weight of understanding pressed down on her chest. And the madness? The visions? "That was me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," he said, meeting her gaze. "Your mind was reacting to the awakening. The connection is powerful, and if untrained, it can overwhelm the senses and drive the soul to the brink. That is why I could not allow you to touch me again until you were ready. I could help guide you, but you must learn to master the energy yourself." She felt a shiver run down her spine. "Master it? How? How can I control something that feels bigger than the world itself?" He turned to face her fully, the sunlight catching the edges of his dark hair and shadowing his angular features. "You must face it head on. The visions, the voices, they are not enemies. They are guides. If you run from them, they will consume you. But if you confront them, understand them, you can channel them. That is what our ancestors learned. That is what binds us." The woman's mind raced. She thought of the chaos she had endured, the hallucinations, the near madness. Could she truly survive this path? Could she face the storm inside her and emerge whole? Fear warred with determination, yet she felt a new clarity. For the first time, the thread connecting her to the man felt less like a trap and more like a lifeline. He extended his hand, not just as a gesture, but as a symbol of guidance and trust. You are ready to begin the first trial. It will test not just your courage, but your mind, your spirit, and your very sense of self. You will see visions unlike any you have encountered, and you must learn to differentiate between the illusions and the truths. Her pulse quickened, but she did not hesitate. She took his hand, feeling a steady warmth that anchored her in the present. "I will do it," she said, voice firm despite the fear curling in her chest. "I will A faint smile touched his lips. "Then let us begin," he said. The desert around them seemed to lean in, the wind holding its breath as if aware of the magnitude of what was about to unfold. The water in the spring shimmered unnaturally, reflecting not just the desert sky, but flickers of the visions she had experienced. It was a doorway, a mirror, and a challenge dot as she gazed into it. She felt the power thrumming in her veins, terrifying, overwhelming, yet undeniably hers. For the first time, she realized that the chaos, the fear, and the madness were not merely trials to endure. They were the very keys to understanding who she was, who they both were, and the destiny that connected them across generations. The truth had been unveiled, and now she had to survive it. The canyon was quiet, save for the faint gurgle of the spring, but the silence held a weight that pressed against the chest of the Apache woman. The man led her deeper into the sheltered grove, where ancient stones jutted from the earth like the fingers of the past reaching toward the sky. Here, he explained, was the sacred site where her trial would begin, a place steeped in power, where the boundaries between the living and the spiritual blurred. "You must understand," he said, voice low and steady, "that this trial is not merely a test of courage. It will challenge your mind, your spirit, and the very essence of who you are. The visions you saw before were only the beginning. Here, you will face the full force of what resides within you." The woman nodded, though her pulse raced with fear and anticipation. The memories, the whispers, the chaotic visions, they were still there, lingering at the edges of her mind. She could feel them pulsing, alive, and demanding attention. Yet, for the first time, she felt a fragile thread of control anchored by his presence. It was enough to push her forward. He instructed her to kneel at the center of the circle formed by the stones. "Close your eyes," he said. "Breathe. Feel the energy in the earth beneath you. Let it rise through your body, and do not resist what comes. Face it fully, and it cannot harm you." Her breath trembled as she obeyed, sinking her palms into the cool sand. The moment her eyes closed, the visions returned, but this time they were sharper, clearer, and more intense. Flames licked at the edges of her consciousness, ancestral voices screamed in her ears, and shadows of warriors and elders swirled around her, their faces contorted in silent command. She gasped, almost faltering, but the hand of the man brushed lightly against her shoulder. "A tether to the present. You are not alone," he whispered. "Trust yourself. Trust what you feel. You are stronger than the chaos." She focused, letting the energy from the earth surge upward, anchoring her mind. The visions shifted. Instead of attacking her, they began to speak, offering lessons through pain and fear. She saw a warrior falling in battle, then rising again. A mother grieving, then laughing at the birth of her child. A leader making impossible decisions, his heart heavy yet resolute. Each vision mirrored not only her ancestry but her potential, showing her that the madness she had feared was also a source of power. Hours or perhaps minutes. Time now meaningless passed in this spiritual crucible. The desert wind howled through the canyon, carrying whispers that seemed both distant and intimate. At times she stumbled mentally, her heart threatening to give in to panic, but the man's presence, steady and patient, anchored her. He did not speak unless necessary, allowing her to confront the storm alone, guiding only with subtle gestures and presence. Finally, The visions began to fade, leaving only echoes, and a profound clarity settled over her. She opened her eyes and found herself standing alone in the center of the stone circle, the desert sun casting long, warm shadows. The man was beside her, but he did not touch her. He only watched, eyes full of quiet approval. "You have faced it," he said simply. "You did not run. You did not break. That is the first step toward mastery." She sank to her knees, exhausted, trembling with relief and awe. The storm within her had not vanished entirely, but it had been tamed, transformed into a source of insight and strength. The visions, once terrifying and incomprehensible, now felt like a part of her, a map, a guide, a legacy she could wield rather than fear. The man extended his hand, and she took it, feeling the thread of connection between them pulse stronger than ever. "There will be more trials," he said, "but you have proven you can endure. You have glimpsed the potential of what you truly are, and together we can face whatever comes next." The desert around them was silent, eternal, and vast, yet it no longer seemed threatening. The stones of the sacred site gleamed faintly in the sun, as if acknowledging her triumph. And within her, the chaos had not disappeared, but it had been reshaped. She was no longer a victim of the visions, but their master and training dot. As they rose to leave the sacred site, she felt a sense of purpose she had never known before. The trial had not only healed the madness threatening to consume her, it had awakened the strength she needed to face the challenges still ahead. She would walk forward into the unknown, guided by the connection, the visions, and the courage that now burned within her soul. The desert sun burned high, casting long, stark shadows across the rocks and sand. The Apache woman stood at the edge of a windswept plateau, the lessons of the rite of healing still resonating within her. The chaos that had once threatened to consume her mind was no longer an enemy. It had become a force she could feel, control, and channel. Every heartbeat carried the echo of her ancestors, every breath a connection to the energy she had once feared. Beside her, the man watched silently, his presence both grounding and affirming. She felt the thread between them pulse steadily, a bond forged in shared struggle and mutual understanding. No longer merely a tether to reality, it had become a conduit for strength. Her senses, once overwhelmed by visions and voices, now perceived the desert in sharper, deeper ways, the rustle of wind through rocks, the subtle shifts in temperature, even the faintest movement of creatures hidden among the dunes. She extended her hands, closing her eyes, and felt the energy swirl within her like a living current. The visions rose again, but this time they were not chaotic, they were a guide. She saw battles and ceremonies, losses and triumphs, and understood each as a lesson, a thread in the tapestry of her lineage. Where she had once seen terror, she now saw purpose. Opening her eyes, she looked at the man and smiled, a mixture of awe, relief, and newfound power. "I understand now," she whispered. "I am not afraid." He nodded, his own expression softened by approval. "You have transformed," he said. "The power is yours, tempered by wisdom. You are ready to face what lies ahead, not just as a follower, but as an equal, a guardian of what was awakened in you." The desert stretched before them, vast and eternal, but it no longer felt daunting. In her heart burned the quiet certainty of mastery. She was no longer a victim of visions or madness, she was a force reborn, ready to step into the destiny that awaited them both. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a landscape of sand, rock, and sun that had once felt harsh, alien, and overwhelming. Now, to the Apache woman, it seemed alive with purpose, each dune and canyon resonating with the power she had mastered within herself. The chaos that had once threatened to consume her mind was now tempered, woven into her being as a source of strength. She moved with steady steps, confident and sure, no longer the frightened woman who had first touched the mysterious stranger on the edge of the ravine. Beside her, the man walked silently, his presence both comforting and affirming. The connection between them hummed quietly, no longer a source of fear or instability, but a tether of understanding and shared destiny. Their bond was no longer just a link between two people. It was a bridge across generations, carrying the legacy of ancestors, the weight of visions, and the promise of a future forged by choice rather than circumstance. As they approached the outskirts of her tribe, the familiar sounds of life, children laughing, animals stirring, the crackle of small fires greeted them. Yet she saw everything differently now. Each figure, each movement, seemed to pulse with subtle energy, a reminder of the spiritual connection that had been awakened and mastered within her. She could sense the presence of those who had come before, feel the guidance of ancestors who had watched her trials, and understand deeply the responsibilities that came with such power. The tribe watched them cautiously, noticing the woman's calm but commanding presence and the man who walked beside her, silent and watchful. She raised her head and stepped forward, her gaze steady, projecting the newfound strength that radiated from her. No words were needed. Her confidence, her mastery of the visions and the energy within her spoke volumes. She had changed. The girl who had stumbled into the desert, overwhelmed by visions and madness, was gone. In her place stood a woman transformed, wise, powerful, and grounded. The man at her side nodded subtly, acknowledging her strength, recognizing her not as a follower, but as an equal, a partner in the legacy that now bound them both. Together they had faced chaos, fear, and the unknown. Together they would face the future, guardians of a power that was as ancient as it was alive. The desert, once a symbol of madness, now reflected their unity,